The ballroom was exactly the kind of room Han Sarang had been trained for. Chandeliers that cost more than most people's apartments. Guests who spoke in implications rather than statements. A string quartet playing something tasteful in the corner that nobody was actually listening to. Sarang moved through all of it the way she moved through everything. Precisely. A smile at the right moment, a nod at the right angle, her champagne glass held with the kind of effortless poise that looked natural only because she had practiced it until it was. She was wearing a gown the color of deep water. Her hair was pinned back without a strand out of place. 3 separate people had told her she looked beautiful tonight, and she had thanked each of them with exactly the same warmth. She was, by every visible measure, completely fine. She was also burning quietly from the inside, not dramatically, nothing so obvious. It was more like the feeling of wearing shoes half a size too small, manageable, ignorable, something you learned to walk through until you forgot you were doing it. She had been walking through it for so long she couldn't remember when it started. That feeling followed her home, sat at the corner of her desk while she reviewed quarterly reports she retained nothing from, stood at the edge of her sleep and made it shallow. It was still there 3 days later when she walked into a documentary interview she had agreed to without thinking much about it, sat down in a studio chair, and came face to face with Landon Cole. She had expected someone more performative. Interviewers usually brought a particular energy into the room, either the careful deference of someone aware they were speaking to Han Sarang of Han Group, or the barely concealed sharpness of someone who wanted to be the journalist who finally got her to say something real. She knew how to handle both. She had a specific smile for each. Landon Cole didn't give her either option. He walked in, checked something on his clipboard, looked at her once, a direct, unhurried look, like he was simply confirming she was present, and sat down across from her. Black British, she would eventually learn. Quiet London accent that made everything he said sound like he'd already thought about it twice. He wasn't performing calm. He simply was calm, the way some people just were, constitutionally, without effort. It was quietly irritating. Han Sarang, he said. That's correct, she replied. Good. He flipped a page. We'll cover Han Group's current portfolio first, then your leadership trajectory. Standard opening before we go deeper. Standard. She had been restructuring Han Group's entire energy division for 4 years. She had sat across from government ministers and negotiated terms that made grown men sweat through their suits. But she smiled pleasantly and said, Of course. The first portion of the interview went exactly as she expected. He asked about Han Group's infrastructure holdings, the gas pipelines running through 3 provinces, the gold subsidiary operating across 2 continents, the quiet political consulting arm that had shaped national energy policy more than once without ever appearing in a headline. She answered everything thoroughly, compellingly, the kind of answers that sounded like full disclosure while revealing only what she chose. He listened, actually listened, not the half-present listening of someone mentally composing their next question, but real attention, the kind that had weight to it. She noticed it and wasn't sure she liked it. You've described Han Group's legacy in slightly different words 4 times now, he said, after her latest answer settled. She kept her expression pleasant. Because it's relevant to each question. Sure, he made a small note. Tell me what Han Group looks like in your hands. Not the board's projection. Not your father's blueprint. What you actually want to build with it. It was a reasonable question. She had an answer prepared. She always had answers prepared. And she gave it. Clean, compelling, forward-facing. Something about sustainable infrastructure and generational evolution of the family's founding vision. He nodded. Then, like it had just occurred to him, entirely offhand, what's something you want that doesn't align with your family's expectations? The room didn't change, but something in Sarang went completely still. It wasn't a dramatic question. He hadn't shifted in his chair or lowered his voice for effect. He asked it the same way you'd ask someone if they'd eaten lunch. Light, direct, no particular agenda attached. And she had nothing. She reached for an answer the way she always reached, automatically, immediately the way breathing happened, and found empty space where the answer should have been. Her mouth opened slightly, closed. She blinked once, and then because she was Hansarang and blank was not a state she permitted herself in public, she recovered, smoothly, pivoted into something about the tension between legacy obligations and innovative leadership and the nuanced navigation of familial expectation within a modern corporate framework. It sounded excellent. Every word of it was a wall. Landon let her finish. Didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. Just waited until the last syllable settled and then looked at her, the same way he had when he first walked in, like he could see past the architecture of her answer to the empty room behind it. "You should think about that," he said quietly. Then he moved to the next question as if nothing had happened. The interview ended 40 minutes later. She thanked his team, shook his hand, firm, brief, professional, and walked out with her posture perfect and her expression composed and the sound of her heels against the floor exactly as it always was. She got into the car. She sat very straight and stared out the window at Seoul moving past in streaks of light while something she could not name sat heavily in her chest and refused to leave. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Ji Young, her assistant. The message read, "Your mother called. The Kang dinner brief is on your desk. She wants confirmation that you've read it. I told her you had. You're welcome." Sarang closed her eyes briefly, then typed back, "I haven't read it." Ji Young's response arrived in under 10 seconds. "I know. That's why I said you're welcome." Sarang almost smiled. Almost. She put the phone face down on the seat and looked back out the window. The question was still there. "What do you want?" She had run a division of one of the most powerful companies in South Korea. She had sat in rooms where the wrong answer cost millions. She had never, not once, been caught without something to say. But a British documentary filmmaker with a clipboard and entirely too much patience had asked her one question. One. And she had come up completely, humiliatingly empty. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that on the way home, and again while she changed out of the press blazer, and again at her desk when she opened the Kang family brief and read the first 2 pages before realizing she hadn't absorbed a single word. She closed the folder, opened it, closed it again. Outside her window, Seoul glittered on without her. Indifferent. Continuous. You should think about that. She pressed her fingertips flat against the desk. She was not going to think about it. She had a dinner on Friday. She had a company to run. She had responsibilities that predated her own preferences by at least 3 generations and would outlast them by 3 more. She had an answer for everything. She picked up the Kang brief one more time, read the same first paragraph 4 times, put it down. If you're still watching, first of all, good, because it's about to get even better. Drop a comment below and tell me, if someone asked you what you want right now, could you actually answer? Let's go. The Kang dinner was held at a private residence in Seongbuk-dong that had been in the family for 4 decades. Old money didn't announce itself in Seoul. It simply existed, quietly and permanently, in houses like this one. High ceilings, understated art, staff who moved without being seen. Sarang arrived 6 minutes early. Her mother was already there. "You read the brief?" her mother asked by way of greeting. "Most of it." Her mother looked at her the way she always did when Sarang said something technically true. Kang Min-jae is 34. He heads the infrastructure arm. His father steps back in 18 months. He is, by every measure, a good match. You've said. I'm saying it again. Sarang accepted a glass of something sparkling from a passing tray and looked out across the room. It was full of people she recognized. Politicians, industrialists, the particular breed of old soul society that wore its power like a second skin. Everyone already knew why they were here tonight. Nobody would say it directly. That was the whole art of evenings like this. She spotted Min-jae before they were introduced. He was standing near the far window, speaking to 2 older men with the patient composure of someone who had learned early how to perform interest he didn't necessarily feel. Tall, well-dressed, a face that was handsome in a careful, symmetrical way. There was nothing wrong with him. She already knew that was going to be a problem. The introduction was smooth, as these things always were. Warm smiles. The right names exchanged. her mother and his father peeling away with the elegant efficiency of people who had choreographed this without appearing to. And then it was just the two of them, standing side by side with their drinks, watching the room. "You were interviewed recently," Minjai said. "The documentary. I saw the announcement. Word travels. In our circles, it practically runs." A small, dry smile, not unkind. "How was it?" "Thorough," she said. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what she meant by that. For a moment they were quiet. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was something closer to the silence of two people who are both very good at performing ease, recognizing the performance in each other. Then he said quietly, not looking at her, "I didn't choose this either." She turned to look at him. His expression hadn't changed, still composed, still pleasant. But something underneath it was very honest. "My family's been planning this alignment for 8 years," he continued. "Before I'd even finished my MBA. By the time anyone thought to mention it to me, it was already decided." He paused. "I've made peace with it. Our family's built something real. We maintain it. Maybe that's its own kind of purpose." He finally looked at her. "I just thought you should know I'm not performing certainty I don't have." It was possibly the most honest thing anyone had said to her all year. And that somehow made it worse, because there was still no warmth in it, no current between them. He was decent and self-aware and completely, genuinely wrong for her, and the worst part was that he could probably sense it too, and was being a gentleman about that as well. She excused herself 20 minutes later. Her mother caught her arm at the edge of the hallway, gently but precisely. "The evening isn't finished. I need some air." "Sarang, 5 minutes." She kept her voice even. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." Her mother studied her for a long moment, then, softly, "This is how it works for families like ours. Love comes after commitment. It always has. It always will." Sarang looked at her, this woman who had built a life around that exact principle, who had never once seemed to regret it, who genuinely believed what she was saying. She nodded, smiled, and walked out the front door. The night air hit her immediately, cool and real and carrying the distant smell of the city, fried food and exhaust, and something floral she couldn't place. She stood on the steps for approximately 3 seconds before she pulled off her heels, held them in one hand, and started walking. She had no plan. She was in a gown that cost more than most monthly salaries, and she was barefoot on a Cheongbuk-dong pavement, and she did not particularly care. She walked further than she should have, turned a corner she didn't know, then another, and stopped. A Pojangmacha, a small street, stall, the kind that existed in cheerful defiance of everything around it. Bright orange tarps, plastic chairs. A woman behind the counter moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had no interest in slowing down. The smell of tteokbokki and fish cakes and something frying in oil hit Sarang like a physical thing. She stood there in her gown. A man at one of the plastic tables looked up at her, looked back down, then looked up again. She sat down. The woman behind the counter appeared in front of her without ceremony. "What do you want?" "What do you want?" "Tteokbokki," Sarang said. "Please." The woman looked her up and down once, the gown, the bare feet, the heels sitting on the plastic table like they were a handbag, and said nothing. Just turned around and got to work. Sarang sat in the orange light and breathed. This, whatever this was, this felt real. The tteokbokki arrived in a paper cup, steaming aggressively. She picked up the wooden skewer, stabbed a rice cake, blew on it twice, not enough, and put it in her mouth. It was extraordinarily hot. She held very still, jaw locked, eyes watering, every muscle in her face engaged in the project of not reacting in public. "You're going to burn your tongue." She looked up. Landon Cole was standing 2 tables away, jacket open, a can of something cold in his hand, looking at her with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something deeply predictable. Of all the street food stalls in all of Seoul. "You again," she said, or tried to. Her tongue was currently staging a protest. He sat down at his table, unhurried as always. "Nice gown." Thank you. Big night? Something like that. He looked at the heels on the table, back at her. Said nothing, which somehow communicated everything. She stabbed another rice cake with slightly less confidence than before. You don't know how to eat that, he said. I do, she replied immediately. You're holding the skewer wrong. I'm holding it fine. You're going to lose a rice cake. I am not going to... The rice cake slid off the skewer and back into the cup. A small splash of red sauce landed on the tablecloth. Landon said nothing. She looked at the sauce, looked at him. Not a word, she said. I didn't say anything. You were thinking very loudly. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the promise of one. Do you want me to show you? She looked at him for a moment. Hans Sarang, heir to a multi-billion-won conglomerate, barefoot in a designer gown, losing a battle with street food. Fine, she said. He showed her how to pin the rice cake properly, skewer angled, not stabbed straight through like she was trying to punish it. She watched, redid it, and managed to get it to her mouth without incident. See? She said. Much better, he agreed. Only took 3 attempts. 2. I counted 3. She decided not to argue because she had, in fact, tried 3 times. They sat across from each other in the orange light while Sol moved noisily around them, and the woman behind the counter refilled things without being asked. It should have been strange. The documentary filmmaker, the corporate heir, a pojang matcha, a Tuesday night. It wasn't strange. That was the part Sarang couldn't quite account for. What are you doing here? She asked. Eating, he said, in Seongbuk-dong. I was filming nearby, neighborhood documentary segment. He tilted his can toward the street. I like this area. Lots of contrast. Old money up the hill, real life down here. Real life, she repeated. You disagree? She looked around. The man 2 tables over was arguing cheerfully with his friend about a football match. A teenage girl was feeding her leftover fish cake to a cat that had appeared from nowhere with suspicious timing. The woman behind the counter was humming something under her breath, badly and without shame. No, Sarang said. I don't disagree. Landon watched her look around the stall the way she did, taking everything in with a kind of quiet hunger, like someone who had been on a controlled diet for too long and had just remembered that other food existed. How was your night? He asked. She picked up her cup. I was being introduced to my future. He was quiet for a moment. The merger. She looked at him sharply. Han Group and Kang Industries, he said without apology. It's not exactly a secret in the circles I've been filming in. Strategic alliance, significant families. A pause. I didn't know it included a marriage component. Most things at that level do. And you're fine with it? I didn't say that. You didn't say you weren't. She set the cup down. Is this still the interview? No, he said simply. This is just me asking. She looked at him. This man who had absolutely no agenda with her, no stake in her answer, no position to protect. He wasn't asking to report it or use it or fold it into a narrative. He was just asking because he wanted to know. It was extraordinary how unfamiliar that felt. I don't know what I am, she said finally. About any of it. He nodded. Didn't rush to fill the silence with comfort or advice or perspective she hadn't asked for. Just let the answer sit there and breathe. She appreciated that more than she knew how to say. He seems decent, she continued, because apparently she was going to talk about this. Minjai, he actually told me he didn't choose it either, which was either very kind or very strategic, and I genuinely cannot tell which. Could be both. Probably is, she exhaled. He said he'd made peace with it, that maintaining what your family built is its own purpose. She paused. I keep trying to find the flaw in that argument. Can you? Not logically. But, she turned the paper cup in her hands. But I've been running Han Group's energy division for 4 years, and I have never once, not once, been asked what I actually want to do with it. What direction I want to take it. What I think the company should become. She stopped. I'm the heir. I've always been the heir. And somehow that's made me the last person anyone thinks to consult. Landon didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at her the way he had in the interview, present, attentive, seeing more than she was consciously offering. "You should be having this conversation with your board," he said. "My board reports to my father." Then him. "My father built Han Group from 2 subsidiaries into what it is now. His opinion on its future direction is not exactly—" She stopped, chose her next words. "Flexible." And Min-jae's family would make that worse? They'd make it permanent. She said it quietly, like admitting it out loud made it more solid than she wanted it to be. 2 boards becoming one, 2 sets of legacy expectations merging into a single immovable structure, and me somewhere in the middle of it, smiling at the right moments. She heard herself, looked slightly startled by what she'd said. Landon said nothing, which was, she was beginning to understand, one of the things he was best at. "I sound dramatic," she said. "You sound like someone who's been answering the wrong question for a long time." She looked at him. He finished his drink, set it down. "What would you do with Han Group," he asked, "if the answer was actually yours?" Nobody had ever asked her that, not like that, not as a real question expecting a real answer. She opened her mouth, closed it, then, slowly, pivot the energy infrastructure toward renewables, significantly. The gold subsidiary is stable. It can support a 10-year transition if the board has the nerve for it. The political consulting arm? She paused. Used differently, that access could actually accelerate green policy rather than just protect existing assets. She said it the way you say something you've been holding quietly for a long time, carefully, like testing weight on ice. "That's specific," Landon said. "I've had the plan for 2 years. And nothing. I write it, I update it, I put it away." She looked at the table. "Because proposing it means a fight I'm not sure I can win alone, and the merger would make it impossible." The humming woman behind the counter refilled Sarang's cup without being asked. Sarang looked up and said thank you, and meant it in a way that was somewhat disproportionate to the Teokbokki. Landon watched her. "You didn't answer my question," he said. "From the interview." She sighed. "I know. You do know. It's complicated." "It's not," he said, gently but very clearly. "You just said exactly what you want. Just now. The plan you've been sitting on for 2 years." He paused. "The question isn't whether you know what you want, Sarang. It's whether you're willing to want it out loud." She stared at him. Nobody had said it to her like that before. No softening, no frame around it to make it easier. Just the truth, plain and sitting between them on a plastic table next to a paper cup of Teokbokki. She didn't have an answer. He didn't seem to expect one right away. "I should go back," she said finally. "Probably." She stood, picked up her heels, and paused. "Why do you care? What I want? Any of this? You got your interview." He looked up at her. "Because you're the most interesting person I've filmed in 3 years, and you're about to disappear into a life you designed for everyone else." A beat. That'd be a waste. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she always did when something caught her off guard. She composed herself, nodded precisely, and said goodnight. She walked 2 full blocks before she realized she was smiling, not the practiced one, the other kind, the kind she'd almost forgotten about. She went back to the dinner, smiled at the right people, said the correct things, stayed another 40 minutes, and then left with her mother in the car, sitting side by side in the kind of silence that had its own vocabulary. "You seem lighter," her mother said somewhere on the expressway. "Do I? It's the fresh air." Her mother looked out her window. "Min-jae made a good impression on our side." His father was pleased. "Good." "Sarang." "I heard you." Her mother turned to look at her fully. "This is not a small thing we are asking." "I know that. We are asking you to build something, a real thing, something that lasts beyond both of us." Her voice was quiet and completely sincere. "I did not have fireworks with your father in the beginning. What we have now, what we built, that is not nothing." Sarang looked at her. "I know it isn't." Then trust that the beginning doesn't have to look like the whole story. She didn't answer. Her mother faced forward again and said nothing more. The car moved through the city, and Sarang sat very still and thought about a man at a plastic table who had told her, without flinching, that she was about to disappear into a life she'd designed for everyone else. She saw Landon 4 days later. Accidentally, genuinely, the way things sometimes happened in a city that was simultaneously enormous and very small. She was cutting through Insadong after a morning meeting, coffee in hand, and he was standing outside a bookshop talking to someone with a camera bag over his shoulder. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. Neither of them looked away first. She walked over because not walking over would have been a choice too, and she wasn't ready to make that one. "Documentary?" she asked, nodding at the camera bag. "Always." He said something to the man beside him, who peeled off with a nod. "How's the tteokbokki recovery going?" "I've been practicing." "On your own?" "With Ji Young, my assistant. She was appalled on multiple levels." He smiled then, a real one, fuller than the almost smiles he usually offered. It did something quite unreasonable to the general atmosphere. "Coffee?" he asked. She should have said she had a meeting. She had 3 meetings. She said, "Sure." They found a small place nearby, the kind with mismatched chairs and coffee that arrived in ceramic cups without handles. She wrapped both hands around hers and felt immediately less like Han Sarang of Han Group and more like a person who drank coffee in the morning. It was a relief she had no language for. They talked about his documentary, about the neighborhoods he'd been filming, about the particular texture of soul that she'd stopped noticing years ago, because when something surrounds you completely, you stop seeing it. He made her see it again in the space of 20 minutes. He asked about Han Group, and she told him more than she meant to, about the renewable energy pivot she'd been sitting on, the board dynamics, the way her father had built something extraordinary, and the way that very extraordinariness had become a kind of cage. "Have you told him?" Landon asked. "Your father, what you actually want to do with the company?" "Once, early on. He said I'd understand the value of stability when I was older." "How old are you now?" 31. "Still waiting to understand it?" "I understand it perfectly," she said. "I just don't think stability and growth are as mutually exclusive as he does." He watched her talk about it. The way her posture changed, the way her hands moved slightly when she stopped editing herself. Like something underneath the composure was alive and had been waiting for room to breathe. "You should say that," he said. "Exactly like that, to your board. It's not that simple. It never is. Doesn't mean it's wrong." She looked at him across the table. "You're very comfortable telling me what to do for someone who barely knows me." "I'm not telling you what to do." Unhurried. Certain. "I'm telling you what I see." "And what's that?" Someone who already knows every answer and keeps pretending the questions are still open. She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked down at her coffee, because he was right, and they both knew it, and she didn't have a composed, polished response for being seen that clearly. They sat there another half hour, easy in a way that still surprised her every time. No performance between them. No positioning. When she finally stood to leave, she was already 20 minutes late for her first meeting, and genuinely could not locate the part of herself that cared. "Same time next week?" he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Is that you asking me to have coffee with you?" "It's me asking if you want coffee next week." "Those are the same thing." "Are they?" She looked at him. He looked back. The almost smile again, the one that stayed just at the edge and never quite arrived, which was somehow more distracting than an actual smile. "I'll think about it," she said. She was back in 2 days. What followed was not a romance in the way people told romances. There was no declaration, no sudden shift from one thing into another. It was quieter than that and more stubborn. A series of coffees, a walk through a market in Mangwon that went 2 hours longer than either of them planned, an evening on a Han River bench where they talked until the city went dark, and she missed a dinner she was supposed to attend and felt for the first time in years like she had spent time rather than spent it correctly. Ji Young noticed immediately. "You've been leaving the office before 7, she said one morning, delivering a file with the expression of a woman storing information. People leave offices before 7. You specifically have not done so in 14 months. She set the file down. Not that I'm counting. You're absolutely counting. I have a spreadsheet. She headed for the door. He's the documentary man, isn't he? It wasn't a question. G. Young. I've seen the coffee cups, foreign brand. Nobody you usually meet drinks that brand. She paused at the door. For what it's worth. She stopped, seemed to decide something. You seem like yourself lately, the actual one. She left before Sarang could respond. Sarang sat with that for a long time. The actual one. Then the envelope arrived. Han Group Legal. Formal letterhead. Her name printed at the top with the precision of something that had been prepared very carefully by very expensive people. Inside, a timeline. The Kang merger formalization. Board votes scheduled. A transitional leadership structure that placed her and Min Jae as co-chairs of the newly consolidated entity. Signing dates. A press release draft, already written, already quoting her own words, in a statement she had never made. She read it twice, set it on her desk, picked it up again. The plan she'd been writing and rewriting for 2 years sat in her laptop 3 feet away. The renewable pivot, the restructure, the version of Han Group that was hers. And this document, this tidy, expensive, inevitable document, was a door closing directly in front of it. She called Landon. He picked up on the second ring. They sent the merger documents, she said. A beat. How bad? They quoted me in a press release I never gave. Her voice was steady. Impressively steady, she thought. They've already written my future. They just haven't told me where to sign yet. Sarang, I'm not panicking, she said quickly. I'm just... She stopped, pressed her fingers flat against the desk. I needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't going to immediately tell me it's for the best. Silence on his end. Not empty silence, the weighted kind. What do you want to do? He asked. And there it was again, that question. Except this time it didn't leave her blank. This time she knew. She just hadn't said it yet. I need to think, she said. Okay. Don't say anything else. I wasn't going to. You were going to say something wise and well-timed. I really wasn't. Landon. Sarang. A beat. Then, quietly, take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She held the phone for a moment after he said it, not because of the romance of it, though it landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to, but because nobody in her life had said those exact words to her before. I'm not going anywhere. Everyone in her world wanted something from her board, her family, the Kang Alliance. Every relationship she had was load-bearing in some structural sense. Even the people who loved her needed her to be a particular thing. Landon didn't need her to be anything. And for the first time she understood how rare that was, and how much she had been missing it. She put the phone down, looked at the merger document, looked at her laptop, opened it, pulled up the plan, read it from the beginning, all of it, every updated version, every margin note, every projection she'd run and rerun for 2 years in the quiet hours when the office was empty and she could think without anyone watching. Then she closed the document, picked up the merger papers, and for the first time, did not reach for a pen. She called Min Jae the next morning, not his family's lawyers, not through a representative or a carefully worded letter drafted by Han Group's PR team, him directly, on the number he had given her the night of the dinner, with the quiet dignity of someone who already half expected she might use it for exactly this. He picked up on the third ring. Sarang. I need to meet with you, she said. Just you. No family. No legal team. A pause. When? Today, if you can. He could. They met at a neutral restaurant in Yongsan, the kind of place with private rooms and discreet staff and absolutely no reason for either of their names to appear in anyone's conversation afterward. She arrived first, sat with her hands folded and her back straight and her mind completely, unusually clear. He walked in and took the seat across from her and looked at her face, and she watched something settle in his expression before she said a single word, like he already knew, like some part of him had been waiting. You were right, she said. The night we met. You said you didn't choose it either. I remember. I've been thinking about that. She met his eyes. You deserve someone who chooses you. Specifically, not the alliance, not the merger. You. She paused. And I can't be that person. The room was very quiet. Minjai looked at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled, slow, controlled, the kind of breath that had been waiting somewhere for a while. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Don't be. He said it without bitterness, without performance. I meant what I said about making peace with things, but... A pause, something honest moving across his face. Peace isn't the same as right. She nodded. He looked at the table, then back at her. The board is going to be difficult. I know. My father. I'll handle it, she said. That part is mine to handle, not yours. He studied her for a moment. You seem different from the other night. I am different from the other night. Something that was almost a smile crossed his face. Good. He stood, buttoned his jacket, paused. For what it's worth, Han Group in your hands specifically is a genuinely interesting prospect. I've read your public statements on energy transition. He tilted his head slightly. The industry's going to notice you when you stop being quiet about it. She looked up at him. Take care of yourself, Sarang, he said, and left. She sat alone in the private room for exactly 2 minutes. Then she paid for the water neither of them had touched and walked out into the afternoon. Her mother was harder. She drove to the family home herself, no driver, which was already unusual enough that the housekeeper met her at the door with a look that communicated significant concern without saying a word. Her mother was in the sitting room with tea she wasn't drinking, which meant she had already received a call. Probably Minjai's father, probably within the last hour. Sarang sat down across from her. Before you say anything, her mother began. I need to go first, Sarang said. Her mother stopped, which in itself was remarkable. Sarang leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and spoke, not with the careful corporate language she used in boardrooms, not with the polished deflection she used at galas. Just plainly, the way she'd spoken at a plastic table in the orange light of a street stall that had nothing to do with her world and everything to do with her. She talked about Han Group, about the renewable pivot, the plan she'd been sitting on, the window that existed right now, this specific configuration of market conditions and political access and company capital. That would close if they spent the next decade in a merger consolidation. She talked about the energy sector the way she talked about it when nobody was grading her, when it was just the plan and her and the quiet hours. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Her mother said nothing. When she finally finished, the room was very still. Her mother looked at her, really looked at her, the way parents sometimes did when they saw something in their child they hadn't noticed was missing until it came back. The board won't accept this easily, her mother said finally. I know. Your father. I'll talk to him. Myself. Directly. Her mother was quiet for another long moment. Then, you sound like your grandfather. Sarang blinked. You said that like it might be a compliment. He built the first subsidiary on nothing but nerve and a plan nobody else believed in. Her mother picked up her tea. It's not entirely a compliment. He was also profoundly irritating to disagree with. Sarang looked at her mother. Her mother looked back. And something between them, some long-held tension, some years-old negotiation that had never quite been named, quietly shifted. I'm not rejecting the family, Sarang said, softer now. I want you to know that. This isn't about walking away. I know what it's about. Her mother set her cup down. I'm not blind, Sarang. I see you. I have always seen you. A pause. I wanted a safe landing for you. That was all. I know. But perhaps, she stopped, seemed to choose something carefully. Perhaps safe and right are not always the same address. It was the closest thing to a concession her mother had ever offered on the subject. Sarang reached across and covered her mother's hand with her own. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. She texted Landon that evening. 3 words. I figured it out. His reply came in under a minute. Where are you? She smiled at her phone. Go to the stall, she typed. I'll find you. The Pojang matcha was exactly as she remembered it. Bright orange tarps, plastic chairs. The same woman behind the counter who recognized Sarang with a look that suggested she was a mild but acceptable curiosity. The cat that had appeared from nowhere last time was back, seated under a chair with the serene confidence of someone who owned the establishment. Sarang sat down. She had come in a blazer and trousers. Work clothes, real clothes, no gown. Her heels were on her feet. She was not performing anything. She sat like she belonged there. Because tonight, she did. Landon arrived 7 minutes later. He came around the corner with his hands in his jacket pockets and stopped when he saw her, took her in the way he always did, that quiet, attentive look that saw more than most people bothered to. He sat down across from her. The woman behind the counter appeared immediately in front of him. What do you want? Tteokbokki, he said. 2. He looked at Sarang. Unless you want to order your own and prove something. 2 is fine, she said. Thought so. The cups arrived steaming. She picked up her skewer, angled it correctly, the way he'd shown her, the way she'd practiced, and got the first rice cake to her mouth cleanly without incident. She looked at him. He raised an eyebrow. Don't, she said. I genuinely wasn't going to say anything. You were going to look impressed in an annoying way. Those are your words, not mine. She laughed. A real one, sudden and unguarded and slightly startled out of her, the kind she couldn't have manufactured if she'd tried. Landon watched her laugh and said nothing. Just looked at her the way he always had, like she was worth looking at clearly, like seeing her was something he did without effort or agenda. Minjae? He asked. Done, respectfully. Your mother. Ongoing, but moving. The board? That, she said, is a very long conversation for another day. Fair. He picked up his own skewer. How do you feel? She considered it, genuinely, the way she'd been learning to consider things, without immediately reaching for the correct answer. Like myself, she said, the actual one. He was quiet for a moment, then, softly, yeah, I can tell. The city moved around them, loud and indifferent and entirely unbothered. Somewhere a motorbike accelerated past. The cat relocated to under Sarang's chair. The woman behind the counter started humming something again, badly, cheerfully, without apology. Sarang looked at Landon across the plastic table. At this man who had asked her one question in a studio and then waited, patiently, without pressure, without need, for her to find her own way to the answer. Who had never tried to be her escape. Who had just been honest. Who had seen her. She leaned across the table. He didn't move away. She kissed him, quietly, deliberately, entirely on her own terms. He kissed her back like he'd been unhurried about this too, like this moment was exactly as long as it needed to be. When she pulled back, she looked at him. Took you long enough, he said. I had things to figure out. You did, he agreed. You really did. She settled back into her plastic chair, picked up her tteokbokki, and looked out at the street. At Seoul in the evening, bright and moving and real. Han Group's future was still unwritten. The board would push back. Her father would need convincing. The plan she'd been holding quietly for 2 years was finally about to make noise. But for the first time in her life, Han Sarang was the one holding the pen. And she was not afraid of a blank page. If this story moved you, if Sarang's journey felt like something you needed to see, share this video with someone who needs to hear it too. Like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. Tell me, what is one thing you want that you haven't said out loud yet? The Nesties are waiting. I'll see you in the next one.